Live.
And we're live.
We don't appear to be live.
I see a little yellow live button.
Well, I see the live button, but I'm watching the YouTubes. Oh, there it is.
Oh,
There's my face.
your face. How's your face look?
Cool. There's my face. On the YouTubes. Hi, everybody. What do I say at the beginning? Oh, yeah. Hey there, hi there, ho there, and welcome to Bad Philosophy, episode 167. I'm your host, Kevin Saunders, and I'm joined today by the ever faithful Stephen Torrance. Hey there, Stephen.
Hello, Kevin. Wonderful to be with you.
Yeah, Stephen, you're joining us today from Calgary. Is that correct?
Calgary, Alberta, Canada.
Alberta, which is in the state Canada.
Yes, it is. And
Yeah,
Alberta,
well, so
I'm finding, is the Texas of Canada.
Really? That's
Yes.
fascinating. My mother is from Edmonton, or she was born in Edmonton, I should say, which makes me half Canadian. And so if I were to be half Canadian, from the Texas of Canada seems great. And if you're in Calgary, I'm sure you found someone on the street there to chat with us today.
I sure did. And he happens to work at a university too, and be someone who has been on Bad Philosophy before. So
What?
I hit the jackpot.
That's a weird coincidence.
I'm here with Shawn Brackett.
Hi, Shawn.
Howdy. How are y'all doing?
I'm doing fine. I appreciate that you're still using howdy. I'm going to assume you always greet people that way in the Texas of Canada.
Actually, I say howdy quite a lot, and
Yeah.
I learned it from my dad, who is from Los Angeles. So I'm not sure how that arose, but
Well,
that's
if
why
we
I
can
say it.
start off with a short digression, back in the days of AOL Instant Messenger, you would always like say hi or ASL or whatever, and I made it a point to always say howdy as an introduction because I was from Texas and gosh darn it, I was going to sound like it. And what that did was actually build howdy into my lexicon, and so now I say it to like actual people.
Right.
Yeah. But it was a conscious decision on my part rather than something that just happened.
Well, in answer to your question, Shawn, I am hanging in there, which means something different here in Canada, as many common terms do. But I mean it in the American way of I am doing just fine.
Good to hear.
Yeah. So Kevin, what are we talking about today?
The futility of language.
Yes, and the fertility of penguins.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't know what we're talking about, Stephen, because all you did was put in the show document, quote, all culture is appropriation. And I don't really know where to go from that. All culture.
All of it.
Well, so we got to define two things. Really four things, but we'll start with two things, and that is culture and appropriation. Then we can get into all and is, which are going to be a little bit more tricky.
Definitely. I think we could spend at least the entire show on is alone.
I mean, Bill Clinton spent a non-zero amount of time arguing about what your definition of is.
And sometimes I want to go back to the 90s, but that's not a part of the 90s I want to go back
No,
to.
definitely not.
Well, apparently,
there.
yeah.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I was just going to add there that Monica Lewinsky's TED Talk is fascinating, and she is. I just would recommend anybody go and watch that, and I won't say anything more about that.
My favorite Monica Lewinsky thing is the fact that she was the host of, I believe it was Mr. Personality.
What on earth is that?
Mr. Personality was a 2003 reality TV show on Fox, which was it was your standard bachelor or bachelorette-esque TV show, with the premise being that the woman had to select from her potential suitors who all had their faces covered by masks throughout the entirety of the show. So she did not know what they looked like until she either chose to kick them off the show or I guess finally choose one as her husband. And what they wore were these super weird, like gladiatorial-esque masks. I'm trying to find an image of it right now and put in the chat because they're super, super weird.
Well, that is definitely not something I would have ever expected Monica Lewinsky to do.
Yeah, that was the weirdest thing about it, was that she was the host of that. And I don't really know how, I have no problem with her being the host of it, but it was weird that was her career path.
One of them, at least.
Yeah, that she ended up there at one point. But also, speaking of the 90s and that period, apparently The People versus O.J. Simpson is a fantastic television show that I have not watched, but I've heard nothing but rave reviews of it in all of its splendiferous 90s glory.
Despite John Travolta?
Including John Travolta.
Wow.
What is this? What is this nonsense?
I don't believe it.
Have you heard of the show, Shawn? Hello? Did I lose you? Hello? Oh, man. Lost the audio. Snap.
I cannot internet, apparently.
Hey, you're back.
I went to look at the image that you sent of Monica Lewinsky and all the guys in the masks, and then when I went to close that, it closed this window as well. So.
Cool.
But I see that we remained live. So, well, maybe that's the internet signal to us to get back on track. There's a very simple story behind this. Shawn and I were on the C train going to Kensington, which is a wonderful place to play hipster bingo in the.
I'm going to pretend I know what either of those things are: the C train or the place you were going.
The C train is the name for the light rail system in Calgary.
Cool.
And Kensington is a shopping and business district across the river from downtown.
Mm-hmm.
And saying it's a good place to play hipster bingo.
Hipster bingo, yeah. I won within like 10 minutes. And we'll maybe talk about hipster bingo on a future episode. Anyway, on the way we were talking about Shawn is you are what sort of a PhD student or master's student right now?
Well, currently I'm a master's student, and my area of specialty is social and cultural history, specifically education, and I do have experience with both the U.S. and I'm learning about Canadian history right now. I will be doing my PhD in Canadian history with a minor field in American, and we were talking about culture and what that means, and I think I might have even brought this up. My frustration with the term that I see used so often now of cultural appropriation and the blanket use of that word for everything that someone of one culture may do or enact or perform that is ostensibly from another culture that they should not be doing. And that covers a wide range. And I want to be really clear. I don't think that cultural appropriation is not a thing. And I recognize that it exists, and it has a variety of forms and impacts. And there is a huge difference between I think I saw an article or a piece, I don't know if it was an article, a piece of a young girl wearing a kimono and performing or playing a tea ceremony, and the internet outrage about this little girl who is white appropriating Japanese culture, when the people who were upset about it were other white people, and then there were Japanese people who were totally okay with it. And like that, from that end of, I presume, innocence of a 6-year-old,
sure,
to the extreme of blackface and capitalizing upon, denigrating, that sort of very harmful aspect of it. And so that's sort of that discussion around those different ends of a spectrum, and a thought that is not my own, but unfortunately I don't remember where I got this idea from. But
what's okay? All thoughts are appropriation,
right? I mean, but culture, but that's a part of how cultures develop, and if is defined as, a series of meanings and practices. I'm throwing it out there for my historian not mentor, but hero, William Sewell.
Bring it on.
Like that all culture is on some level appropriative. We take things from others and we like them or we don't, and we take them and integrate them into what we do. We teach our children and our friends. And so that's what I meant by all culture is appropriation.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I feel the need to explain that because that could get...
That's exactly why we're here. I mean, what was up primarily for me in the discussion, and one of the reasons I found this interesting is just the question of how does culture come about, right? How is culture created? And this idea of cultural appropriation, and then how it interacts with that process. You have also done a lot of work with or studied a lot of the Indigenous peoples of Canada and the various interactions between the Canadians of various kinds over the years and the Indigenous populations here. And so that was also up for me of like what you see going on in terms of culture and appropriation and or just creation happening here. But also, Kevin, I did want to just throw out all these questions out there because I know you have strong feelings about them. So
I do.
What is your first response to what Shawn just put out there?
Well, so I mean, as often has been the case recently on Bad Philosophy, I do agree with a lot of what you're saying. And so that word appropriation, I think, is really the sticking point. A culture borrowing practices or beliefs from other cultures, is that appropriation or not? Or how long separated from that do we have to be before it's no longer appropriation? You look at the Roman Empire and Christmas versus Saturnalia or other similar winter festivals is one of those an appropriation. Was it then? Is it okay now just because it's been around for a long time? And arguably, yes. Like I think that still counts. Is it necessarily negative? And I would say that's where things get a little bit trickier, and that's where context becomes really important. Because, I mean, your example of this sort of tea ceremony, we have to look at what is the context in which it's happening, where that video was created, why it was created, and furthermore, the sort of intent behind it, I think, is important. It's not the only thing, because people doing blackface, which to be used that as an example of cultural appropriation, I don't actually think that was. I think that was cultural subjugation rather than appropriation. That everything within minstrelsy was an intentional creation that kept the African American populations subjugated through culture. It was not hey, we see Black people doing this, we think it's really cool, so we're going to steal it. I think that argument could be more found in something like jazz or rock and roll, but I feel like blackface is the exact opposite of cultural appropriation, and even worse.
Oh, agreed.
Yeah.
On that.
Yeah. Actually, nobody's going to hear you come and say and go, yeah, blackface is great. But,
and I think to clarify further, when I think of blackface, I think of it being, if the starting point for the definition of a cultural appropriation is profiting from another culture, then I think blackface is an example, because it was it was used not only to create a very distinct racial hierarchy between better and worse and good and bad, it was also used to profit from. You have in the early 20th century, the use of that to earn money from performances in a way that would not have that white face. If white people were specifically dressing up in exaggerated physical features connected to whiteness, would not have. They were using the alleged physical appearance of Blacks, the alleged behaviors and speech patterns of Black people to one, make fun of them, denigrate them, and harm them, but also to earn profit from. So I think I think it is cultural appropriation if the definition includes the use of. But if you mean, or if cultural appropriation means integrating something that is seen as valuable by the dominant culture, then I agree with you that it is not cultural appropriation.
And I think I'm going to fall to that second definition, which is I think where we started. But I say that because there's when I speak of cultural appropriation, I'm really looking at perhaps what might be called an earnest but unintentionally insulting act. Something that comes to mind is Miley Cyrus at the VMAs twerking a few years ago. That which got bandied about quite a bit in sort of cultural appropriation. Also because of the backup dancers she had and sort of that whole depiction, not just her individual act, but everything that was involved in that. And that was something that was cultural appropriation because of how tone deaf it was. Because it was Miley Cyrus saying, I think twerking is cool. I like twerking videos. I like the act. I like dancing, without understanding any of the context around it. And so in comparison to perhaps this tea ceremony video, which I've not seen, and so I'm just referencing from what you've said, which may have been an attempt to earnestly recreate this experience with that context, with that understanding, rather than coming from a place of ignorance going, hey, I think that looks cool, as opposed to if I were to throw on a kimono and put on what I think a tea ceremony is with no actual understanding of it, but saying, hey, this is cool and foreign and othered, and I want to take that and do it,
right?
And it's cool and foreign because it's othered. That feels much more like cultural appropriation to me, because not necessarily of the intent, but of the context.
Agreed. It reminds me of headdresses from indigenous peoples used for everything from getting drunk and raving at Coachella to selling American apparel.
Or football teams.
I mean, that's just straight up racist. Stop doing that. Listening.
Right.
Let's stop doing that.
Let's stop that. It's super racist.
Well, once again, y'all are just too dang agreeable. The last episode we had Simon Ponder on, and Kevin was trying to get a good debate going about film versus digital, and we ended up just agreeing on everything. I think this is another data point in our evolution. I think we're just becoming we don't really feel like arguing about stuff anymore.
Well, I think I've from what I've seen of you, Steve, and I think I've done the same. Is since the heydays of bad philosophy back at Texas Tech, where my default instinct was to say you're wrong. Now my default instinct is to say, well, let's think about each other's position, and I try to be more empathetic than I certainly was 8 years ago.
Yeah, I would agree that being training to be a historian has forced me to consider other positions.
Absolutely.
And that does come in part because I am a white guy.
Yeah.
And going into college and then the MEd and now the MA of reading things of historical documents like, no, we actually said those things.
Yeah.
And this is a long-term ramification of that, and intentionally quote decolonizing your own mind. That's difficult.
Absolutely.
And it's ongoing, but I think it is worthwhile. And so I hope that I am actually open to new ideas, and I'm not just in this liberal academic echo chamber of look at how great and wonderful I am.
Yeah,
that's not what I want. But
well, I think being aware of that potential. Yeah. Oh yeah, we've definitely come across that. Yes.
Yeah.
And but I think also being aware of the fact that is a possibility, as you say, of sort of being trapped in that what I call the white neoliberalism, and that is definitely dangerous. But as long as you're willing to stay vigilant, as it were, and when somebody calls you out on your bullshit, go, yep, you're right, I was being bullshitty. I should re-examine what's going on here. And being able to do that, and constantly being able to do that, I think is a big part of just being empathetic to other humans and going, oh yeah, you are other people.
Yeah.
Have you ever
I
heard the
wonder
term?
too.
Go ahead. I'll hold it for a
Um,
sec.
well, what I'm still wondering is like, it's in a way, this is coming from a bit of a like an evolutionary or progressive framework. When I think, well, what is the next step then for white educated people like us? And this was a question I think I posed to you, Kevin, shortly after the sign language thing, which is what is our culture, and how do we proceed to engage in the act of cultural creation consciously, respectfully? Like, what does that look like?
I mean, that's something I struggle with sometimes, being a writer and trying to write my truth, but still being aware of a multitude of other stories that mine potentially ignores or downplays or even hurts is a stumbling block sometimes. That's, that feeds into the white page syndrome of just staring at a blank page and going,
yeah, I don't know.
And I think the solution, such as it is not in the work itself, but it is in broadening the playing field and championing those works and those things that speak to other truths and speak from other experiences, and making sure that they too get heard and that they too have that presence. And by doing that, it doesn't have to affect my work. Obviously it will, intentionally or otherwise, but finding opportunities to champion and to expose myself to works of other groups, and then be comfortable writing what I am, but still being willing to interrogate and have others question it, and again continuing to listen. And it's okay to be proud of a thing I made and still have problems with it at a later point in time. Or same thing for what other people's make. There's a really fascinating essay that was on, I don't remember what it was on. I'm going to pivot a little bit. Have either of y'all listened to the musical Hamilton?
I am familiar with the premise, but I haven't heard it myself. No.
I've heard a few excerpts in an interview with one of the leads. Yeah.
Well, it's amazing. I'm going to start off with that. And it was getting a ton of really amazing press, and still is, and it's incredibly popular. And theater and performance scholar, and it's getting a lot of praise because of cross-cultural casting. I think there's one white guy in the entire cast, retelling sort of these stories and reevaluating them, and just being really well produced and using the language and music of hip hop, but from someone who grew up with that culture. So if I were to write Hamilton, it would be considered cultural appropriation because I know nothing about hip hop. I could learn about Hamilton, but I don't have that lived in experience. Whereas you look at someone like Lin-Manuel Miranda, the writer and star of Alexander Hamilton, that does, and like goes onto genius.com and annotates his own work and saying like, this is what I'm referencing, this is what I'm talking about, and seeing that rich tapestry he's pulling from because he lived through that. He lived not through the experience of being Alexander Hamilton, but lived through the cultural moment of 90s hip hop, which is what it's pulling most from. And so it's getting a lot of praise for this sort of stuff. But there's a theater scholar, James McMaster, who wrote a really fascinating article about it. I'm going to link to it here. It's on HowlRound, which is a knowledge commons by and for the theater community. But it's called Why Hamilton is Not the Revolution You Think It Is.
I saw that. I didn't read all of it, but I think I read the introduction.
It's a great article. And I agree with all of the things he's saying, which is that Hamilton's got problems. It's not perfect. But our job as critics, and particularly it has problems with like immigration narratives and feminism and some really and a couple other things that are really important, like the idea of a revolution. And a lot of those things are and basically he's calling it out for being too patriotic, which is tying into a lot of its success. and all of those things are accurate. And he kind of ends by saying, you know, I still think Hamilton is a great musical. I still think that these things need to be done, and that Lin-Manuel Miranda is one of the best chances that non-white culture, and particularly Latino-Latina culture, has in the theater space. Like, that's our best shot right now. But we still have to be able to critique and criticize the things we love the most.
Ooh, that's super important.
And so it's really fascinating, just because there were so few people that were willing to do that. Because on the internet in particular, we have this sort of, you love it or hate it. You are not allowed to have a nuanced opinion of things. If you don't love something 100%, 110%, you must hate it and think it's terrible, and you're wrong.
Yeah, we've the loss of nuance has seeped into, I would say, university students' writing that I mark.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I mean,
You've seen this. You've seen this shift,
and I've seen this at several universities, both in Canada and the U.S., and it's disheartening. That they, I mean, I don't want to make the annoying and inaccurate generalization.
The millennials.
Oh God! Yeah. But I notice it with the students that I have worked at, that a number of them, a disappointing number of them. For context sake, I am a teaching assistant for a class that is called Comparison of Canadian and American Cultures.
Awesome. That sounds like an amazing class.
It's great. And being an American TA for a Canadian professor in Canada is a fascinating experience.
I gotta believe.
But some of the papers have really can be reduced down to Canada good, America bad, or America good, Canada bad. And you know, and the class is comparison, not judgment, or it's not a persuasive class. We're not trying to convince you one way or the other, but we're trying to help you understand the nuances of culture and what it means and how it's contested through history and currently, and the similarities and differences that sort of remain hidden.
Yeah. To a brief point of that, and this is only somewhat related, Shawn. Has everyone ever interrogated your use of American to refer to the United States of America?
Interestingly, not in Canada.
Really?
In the U.S., when I was at Tech, I took a class from the history department for my degree, and very early on we talked about America versus United States, the fact that we don't have an English language demonym for the United States other than American.
Right.
We aren't United Statesians.
I believe there was one I saw that was Ussicans that was trying to get. Hang on a sec. Hey, Amy.
Yeah.
What's the U.S. central term that's not American?
I don't know.
No, don't know.
Using U.S. subjects and U.S. citizens.
Okay. Amy uses U.S. subjects and citizens. I'm trying. There's one I've heard, and I don't know what it is. Amy is also a scholar of these sorts of things and knows way more than I do. She's her dissertation is on Puritans in the United States, and not the Puritans themselves, but depictions thereof in the U.S. Anyway.
I changed the structure of sentences, so I don't need a noun to describe who's in the U.S.
Cool. Amy changes the subject of sentences so she doesn't need the noun, which is a great way of dealing with that as well. And I ask because I think it is really important. We're talking about language. We're talking about appropriation, and there's an area of study called the Hemispheric Studies. There's actually the Hemispheric Institute, which is trying to and I think is on the right path of taking Americans away from those that live in the U.S. and giving it to those that live in the Americas.
Right.
And it's something that I've been very aware of, and I'm not perfect about it, I'm sure, because I don't always catch myself doing it. But being able to say U.S. citizens or anything else other than referring to America being exclusively the United States of America, which is, one might say, a strong act of cultural appropriation and cultural subjugation, of saying that other continent, nothing. Everything below the U.S., nothing. Even Canadians are Americans in the hemispheric and and continental perspective.
And my eyes are getting very big because the last thing Canadians want to be is Americans, and I have learned that distinctly.
Well, yeah, but that's because of this sort of distinction that what I'm critiquing is the use of the word American.
Yeah.
And I am actually more aware of it, I think, than the students I've worked with.
Yeah.
I'm the one correcting their papers and crossing out America and writing the United States. I don't correct American to U.S. citizen because in history, sometimes we're talking about people who aren't citizens.
Well, you could talk residents. You could talk the people who live there. Again, you can restructure your sentence so you don't have to have the specific proper noun. But I think in this discussion, I think that's in this discussion of cultural appropriation, I think that's one of our biggest sins.
Is American? Really?
Well, okay, I think it's a unknown sin. I'll put it to you that way. Okay. I don't think we interrogated enough.
I gotta say though, I would refer to the United States as the United States in almost every sentence until I went to Europe, where in pretty much every sentence they say America to mean the United States. They don't say United States ever.
But just because it's normalized doesn't make it okay.
Sure. And I mean, I begin to think of like this is now a sin that is seeping into like the global culture, right?
Well, and for what it's worth, yes, Europe and the United States have vastly different cultures, both within and between them. But I think if you're talking about colonialism, they both definitely tie into the same history that wants to call the U.S. America. Sure. And so hearing that much of Europe repeats those does not surprise me because they both have very similar colonial histories, and that ties into their language. Who we are defines how we talk.
I think we're missing some of the linguistic historical context, which is that, I mean, we talked about before, language is foundational. It reflects how we express our thoughts and meanings. And the formal name for Mexico is the United Mexican States. Colombia, before being the Republic of Colombia, was the United States of Colombia. And the formal title of the United States is United States of America. Sure. And so I think that reflects a much more nebulous understanding of what America is and what it was considered to be. Yes, it comes from Amerigo Vespucci, the map of the New World, things of that nature. But I don't think that the term was ever as stable as us looking back and projecting onto that. And my second point to that would be, again, we don't have an English language demonym, a demonym being the name that is given to a people from a certain place. So Canada has Canadians. And where in Spanish there is, it's Estado Unidense, which is transliterally United Statesian. And in my experience, I don't want to generalize, but in my experience, when I'm having conversations in Spanish with teachers from Central America, they're saying Estado Unidense to refer to what I would say American. And sometimes they would use Americano to refer to a person from the entire hemisphere. So, I think there's a lot more give and take and back and forth about the possibilities. And I'm not sure that I agree with the idea that the demonym of the United States is a specifically colonial project designed to, perpetuate particular values. I think it's an unintentional byproduct.
But I think it has the effect of continuing that in the same way where you could argue that certain things are, Miley Cyrus's performance of twerking at the VMAs was not created as an attempt to, subjugate or continue the subjugation of Black bodies in the U.S., but it has that effect. And I feel like I have a responsibility to comment and critique that and do my best to keep it from continuing. So yes, I think historically speaking, that may not have been the original intent of using American to refer to U.S. populations, but the fact that it has become the norm reinforces. So language creates and reinforces, and we create with language, and it becomes this cycle, this loop. And if we continue to use that, it continues to entrench those belief systems intentionally or otherwise, and being able to interrogate them in our own speech. I'm not saying we have to go police everybody else's, but we have to be able to look at how we use words and look at the effects that those have, whether or not we mean them. And then, in environments where we have the privilege to challenge it, to do so.
Do you think that, let me rephrase. Let's assume that you're right.
Okay.
What is the negative outcome? What is the harm? So what if it is intentional even? So what if if people in the United States say, we are America, period. So what is the harm? And I'm asking genuinely. This is not
it's okay. Because I have an honest and genuine answer. When we erase peoples from language, groups of people from language, they cease to exist, because language is who we are.
So I don't understand.
So by using American to solely refer to the people that live in the United States, when that term should be used to refer to those that live in the Americas, we are taking that vast group of cultures, that hemisphere's worth of peoples, and reducing them to one and erasing everybody else.
I would argue that might even be a good thing, because go with me.
No, okay. You're gonna have to explain this one real hard.
Yeah.
The word European refers to someone from Europe, a continent of peoples and cultures, like you just said. How often is that word used to paint every person of 450 million who live on that continent with the same brush? Europeans are like this. And when we're talking about scales that large, it's even better example, African. And white Americans, white people from the US, who may not even understand that Africa is a continent and not a country, or Africans are all like that, and it collapses different groups of people into one.
It's a convenient abbreviation.
And Americans does the same thing,
but the scale is reduced
to
however many.
Well, to
people live in the Western Hemisphere, to 300 million.
In the case of it being used now, it's reduced to the scale of 300 million, right?
But it's ignoring the fact that South America exists. It's ignoring the fact that other countries exist in North America.
Of course, well, and I don't think it. Well,
maybe ideally, I hear kind of where both of y'all are coming from. It's like ideally, it should be up to the people from a region to decide how they should be referred to by others, right? Like in a perfect world, if I were choosing, I would want to be referred to as Texan, right? If I were really choosing,
which I do as well.
Yeah.
First, or in addition to
first.
Okay.
I don't identify as an American, or I wouldn't identify as a United Statesian. Like the level on which I identify myself is at most state, and even more preferably, if there were a word for it, I would be a Central Texan, right? I identify with my bioregion, the ecological area around which I am sustained and where my community is. So, folks in Europe would probably prefer to be identified as Belgian or Italian or Catalan. What about nations who are contained within other Kurdish, right? We now have it's so. Kevin, have you talked about this on your identity podcast yet?
An identity podcast?
The one that you hinted at to me.
Oh, that one hasn't started yet, actually.
Okay.
We're having trouble recording our first episode.
And Kevin, I think one...
Just go to a Freebirds and open up a laptop.
Yeah.
Oh, man. No, thank you.
Go ahead.
Oh, I totally lost my train of thought. I got
I'm sorry.
distracted
I'm
by
so
the thought
sorry
of
I
Mexican
derailed you.
food, which is, I'm sorry, Canada, I love you, but it's the worst here. It's like Tex-Mex even. Like, I know that free burgers is not Mexican food, but
No.
it's just bad here. Help me. Anyway, coming back to my thought process through the word American, that, you know, Stephen, you were talking about self-describing as Texan first or Central Texan, and that all of these terms to define who we are rest on other assumptions. And so if you say you are Canadian, or you're Canadian, if you're Texan, both of those identities are based on political boundaries, which, as Kevin, you were saying, reinforces the legitimacy of those particular boundaries.
Absolutely.
And they're totally convenient because your passport says the country of origin. Texas specifically has, it's the asterisks of American history. And you know, it's hard
and
to
Texas
deal
has
with.
worked really hard to become that. We tried to erase, you know, we erased all of the Civil War presence as far as we can. It's like, oh, that was other people. We're not part of the South. We didn't have slaves and fight in the Civil War to try and keep one people.
Totally not. Yeah,
of course not. But
I actually,
I was real quick, Kevin.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sort of wrap up. That American in the hemispheric sense is awesome for me. I think geographic, regional, cultural identities. Like, I am Kurdish. There's no Kurdish state right now. But the Americas is a fairly stable construct because you're referring to a landmass.
Yes.
And I like that because a lot of my work is transnational. And I am interested in questions of the movement of people and ideas across the 49th parallel between, you know, the US and Canada. And the, you know, borders are constructed and they're built, and I will stop there because I could go on an hours long tear. But I do want to add that the Americas, I think, or Americans as a hemispheric term, I like that. And I actually
I'm on board for using it that way. I think from this discussion onward, I will no longer refer to myself or others as Americans when I mean United States citizens.
And that's all I really wanted.
Yeah.
We could really try to get United Statesian to be a thing.
Yeah. Well, I did pull up the Wikipedia page for names of U.S. citizens, which I've linked in the comment field.
Oh, interesting.
And it sort of I mean, it's a short Wikipedia article, but it sort of talks about the development of the term American to speak to the U.S. citizens.
Right.
And you know, it mentions like colloquial names like Yank or Yankee.
Yeah.
I would be okay if that took on, and I don't even like being called a Yankee because I'm from Texas. But I would prefer that over American. You know, in the same way that you know, French people are somewhat negatively called frogs. I would be okay if Yankee became a standard terminology to refer to those people. Usonian is another one that's been used. There's a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
No.
It sounds like a rejected, you know, like ISO standard.
It does sound like that.
We don't need more of those.
Apparently, Usonia was a word used by American architect Frank Lloyd Wright to refer to his vision for the landscape of the United States.
Wow.
Usonian.
Well, if we project into the future, the current political issues, and if the country eventually collapses, then we can just go back to, you know, local regional names like Cascadian or
Appalachian.
Yep. Who are the Utahns?
Utes? Are you talking about the indigenous people?
Well,
hold on,
I
got the list. Utahn, Utahn.
Yeah, that's strange. Well, I'm at the very least going to make that one revision. There's something here that I'm still somewhat curious about that we've been dancing around, which is this. And I think you spoke a lot to it, Kevin, of like the kind of the hows of moving forward in the identity words we choose, but also just the act of cultural creation itself. And something was in there in what Shawn said around intentionality. And I think merely what y'all were both getting at was like, to do cultural creation in a more intentional way.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas usually what happens is it is just sort of thrown together, or it's done through intentions that have nothing to do with empathy, right?
Yeah.
We're pulling from different things, and yet there's a sense in which I wonder how artificial that then makes culture, or like cultural creation or evolution. Or is that then like looped into the natural process?
No, I think it becomes natural. I think
Yeah.
that becomes part of the process. Is we can talk about how much of language is unintentional but has
Yeah.
consequences, but that doesn't mean language and art can't be intentional and still have consequences that matter.
Right.
And I think when we become more intentional, more deliberate, we make sure, or we are attempting to make sure, that the consequences that happen are positive and beneficial, rather than not caring and just letting it happen, which tends to reinforce structures of power.
Don't be along for the ride.
Yeah.
Take it. Don't let Jesus take the wheel. Take it yourself. Come on, Carrie Underwood. Was that her?
I don't know.
I mean, Jesus Take the Wheel's been around for a long time.
I'm looking around.
Yeah.
Steven, save me. I don't know.
I have no idea.
And I think, of course, I'm always going to come back to historical examples.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
one example that I was chatting about with Steven the other day was the connection between the Scots and kilts.
Oh, yeah.
And that being a classic example of an ancient tradition and something that has always been associated with Scottish people, and it marks their culture as distinct from the bloody English and Irish and Welsh. And
I guess I'm going to find out that's not true.
That is not
speaking.
It kind of ruined me. It's Eric Hobsbawm was a professor in the UK, and he wrote a book called The Invention of Tradition. Sorry.
Okay.
And he goes on a tear, to use that phrase again, about the construction of culture and specifically traditions. And traditions are a sort of a key marker of culture, based on how the tradition arose, who participates, what that creation event meant for the culture. And he goes on to argue that the invention of the Scottish kilt occurs in the 1750s, I believe. It's 18th century.
That's fascinating.
And I find in that both an interesting deconstruction of what I had assumed, and I think many people who aren't. I wonder if Scottish people think the same thing. The assumption that it's old, but also that you can intentionally create new traditions as a way to represent values, saying this is our community, this is what we do and who we are, and it can endure.
So on a personal, much smaller scale, my family did exactly that. We invented a tradition. This was, I was still an undergrad, I think, when it happened. But my sister wanted to create a tradition of making cookies at Christmas and decorating cookies. So making sugar cookies and decorating them with icing and the like. And that has become a family tradition now. That is something that we do deliberately and intentionally. And now we kind of do it at this point because it is tradition, even though we know full well within my family unit that it started as an attempt to create a tradition.
Yeah.
And
I think that, yeah. To use maybe a slightly less cheery example, like we touched on the De Beers Diamond Corporation's creation of the tradition of giving a diamond engagement.
I read a fascinating article on that made me so angry. I had to read it in like multiple sittings because I would read part of it, get angry, have to put it down and come back.
And it really, it's at some point there's that recognition that happens among a class with power, perhaps, and maybe it's an intentional or unintentional act, but that with a few brushstrokes, the creation of words, and timings and a lot of repetition of that, you can, if you say it often enough, make it appear as though it's been there forever.
Absolutely.
As an example, see textbooks. Well, specifically historical textbooks.
How so?
Oh, you repeat something often enough, and
It becomes true.
right. The historical narrative is
Yeah.
is
Oh,
something
that's
that is contested.
And contestant.
It is a contestant on The Price is Right, because Texas controls the textbook market.
Oh yeah.
Yes, they do.
I got that segue in.
Damn.
it's good. It's good.
Yeah.
Also, it's terrible that Texas controls the textbook market. Did you see it was a group of, I believe it was historians that were critiquing the textbook standards that Texas put out?
Yes, and actually, I think one of my old professors from UNC.
Oh, that's awesome.
I think because he works in history education, a lot, and he is a vocal advocate for revisionism and being okay with unsettling a narrative and maybe not having everything be a bald eagle flew over George Washington and liberty descended upon the ignorance.
Yeah.
As they were washed over with Americanness. Like, we can complicate the narrative and still recognize the achievements and risks of key people. Like, they're not mutually exclusive.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But I think the idea of repeating things until they're true doesn't just apply to history textbooks, although it does. Doesn't just apply to marketing, like in Diamonds, but also to that's how language is made. We keep repeating a thing. I'm remembering a book that I read in probably middle school called Frindle, Frindle, which is literally about that happening. A young boy names his pen Frindle, Frin. I'm spelling it Dle. He decides to call it a Frindle instead, and it becomes a word through usage throughout, like, his stuff, and it just becomes a word, which is fascinating. And it was the first time I realized that you could even do that.
Yeah, it's I mean, growing up on the internet, you saw this, or I think we all saw this happen very, very quickly, and we have visceral examples of chat speak, memes themselves, and these sort of rapidly forming, and never really like credited to anyone, nuggets of culture just flying about all the time.
Well, and I think it extends to even more important things than that, than like LOL, which is definitely a term that exists now and is used as punctuation even.
Yeah.
But words like cisgender is something that I didn't know 5 years ago, and has probably existed longer than that. But we've also hit this point in our lives where I can say that word and most people know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Right. There's an interesting example in my own experience that connects us between the construction of language and cultural appropriation, and lots of different things.
Maybe we'll end on this one if it's.
I think it's a good punchy one.
Great.
Cool.
So I think of a stop sign. It's ubiquitous, and in many places it is written in a Latin alphabet and it spells the English word stop.
Yeah.
Even in Europe, even in France. And I bring up France specifically because of the situation of Quebec in Canada. And Quebec's...
Do they have stop signs?
They do have stop signs. They do. They may not obey them. But they do have stop signs in Quebec.
Exist. Yeah, they're a gesture in the direction.
Do they say stop, or do they say whatever stop is in French?
They say arrête. A-R-R-E-T with a circumflex over the E. But that stems from Quebec's very strict language laws.
Yeah.
Yes.
Bill 101 for the text of that interesting law. But arrête means stop. It's a noun in French.
Oh, it's not a command.
It's not a command.
So you would have a bus stop. Like that's the word. And I am not fluent in French, so if you are, please correct me. But my understanding is that the command would be arrêter, ARRETEZ for my local audience. And
I prefer Z anyway.
Yeah,
it is kind of nice. I like it.
It's conclusive.
But that it reflects Quebec's culture and history and how the repeated use of that word. Now a francophone would see that and just know, I'm going to stop my vehicle. I'm going to pump the brakes and I'm going to stop, even if it may be technically grammatically incorrect.
I know what I'm supposed to do.
I know what I'm supposed to do.
I think the redness takes care of that part,
fair
the
enough.
intention.
Assuming someone is not red or green colorblind and can tell the difference.
True.
Oh.
In that case, maybe there's the shape, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
The whole cloth.
That's what made it work. But it helps to make Quebec a distinct society,
which is
and
what they want.
Maintain its distinctiveness. Yes, that's really important.
Well,
that's a good
thank you all
place
for
to
the
stop.
discussion. I think we're close to needing to vacate our space here in the University of Calgary
Digital Media Commons at the Taylor Family Digital Library.
Ooh,
yeah,
fancy. I'm in my living room and I'm not wearing pants.
We are. They told us we had to put on pants.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I was wearing my bathrobe before we started, but then I reached behind me and found this polo shirt that I could put on, and I was like, "Oh, now I look professional," but I'm still not wearing pants.
It's all right. I think we'll forgive you for that one. So,
for our longtime listeners, this is hardly the first time I've recorded a podcast without wearing pants.
See if you can go back and guess by listening to the episodes. Sounds like a no pants.
Yeah. This feels no pantsy to me.
I'm expecting that spreadsheet in our inbox by next Tuesday.
Well, thank you, Stephen and Shawn, both for coming on. I know we have to wrap up so you can get out so we can do post-show and stuff before they kick you out. You can always, of course, follow the show at twitter.com/badphilosophy. We're on Facebook, probably. I don't know. Yes. Stephen, I know you are on Twitter at STOSS. You say the thing. I don't know how to spell your name.
STORRENCE.
Yeah, Storrence. Yeah. I'm, of course, always at KevSond, almost everywhere. You can find me there. Shawn, do you have a Twitter preference you'd like to say, or if you would rather mention a different thing, feel free.
Okay. I'm on Twitter at Shawn Brackett, SHAWNBRACKE, 2 T's.
2
It's
T's.
really important to me. Although I have not been active on Twitter for a while.
That's okay.
I will respond, but I'm not really on there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Funny enough, for our longtime Bad Philosophy fans, there is someone who has the Twitter handle at _Bad Philosophy. As far as, their tweets are protected, so I don't know who it is. It's just a person who appears to be tweeting pretty commonly, because on my Twitter feed, where I have Bad Philosophy as a saved search, I see lots of people responding to this person, but I don't actually see their tweets because they are protected.
Fascinating. Well, more power to them.
Yeah. So that's our show. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you next time on Bad Philosophy.
Yay!
Woo.
So,
episode title.